Greetings, folks. Welcome back to the Jason Damico Show. So happy to have you with us once again. Close to 130 episodes and counting. Thanks so much for the support. Special thanks to Simplecast, Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, all the great platforms out there that help get the word out and distribute the show. And man, I am so stoked to introduce to you our guest today. Our guest is a Wall Street performance coach, soul counselor, and author of 6 books on spirituality and culture in modern life. He is credited with coining the phrase spiritual but not religious, and was the first theologian author to name and delineate the concept and movement in his 2000 book by the same name. To date, he has garnered more than 1 million TikTok followers and continues to help folks worldwide with his famously recognized badass counseling brand and services. Please welcome to the show, Sven Erlandson.
Thank you very much. Nah, that's all right. Trust me, I have 5 older brothers. I've been called worse, Jason.
So it's so great to have you. And I've been spending the last few hours last night, a little bit this morning, diving into your life, diving into your story. And man, the amount of lifetimes you've lived in whatever the 50 so years you've been here are just incredible.
Very gracious. Thank you. It sometimes shocks me. Do you ever do that, Jason? I don't know how old you are, but do you ever do that in your life where you look back on, let's say, like when you were 18, all right, you're just coming out of high school and you look back and you say, how many lifetimes have I lived since I was 18?
Yeah.
Because I literally just last night, I was laying in bed with my girlfriend, we're talking, and I was thinking about like 18, and I was remembering, okay, this time of year I was in wrestling season and so forth. And I'm like, that was like 1, 2, 3, that was like 7 lifetimes ago. I feel like I've lived like 7 or 5 or 6 blocks of lifetimes since then. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's not just that it's so long ago, but there are like phases. There's like chapters or whatever, sort of cliche we want to use. It's like, oh, wow, okay, that chapter's done. And so we live several lifetimes within a lifetime. Have you had this similar experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, so I turned 28 in January, and things, the last 10 years, first of all, just snapped by. And not only that, I think, especially the last 2 years with what's happened and all the changes in the world and kind of what we're dealing with post-pandemic, it feels like it's been 10 years compacted into that 2 years, and then the 10 years on top of that.
Interesting.
So for me, it almost feels like 20 within 10
You're
years.
an old man, Jason. You don't look the part, but you're an old man inside.
They call me the old soul for some reason. I keep getting thrown and coined that term, and I'm not sure why that is. And I when I was younger, I always wanted to be older. Now as I get older, I just want to be younger. So there's we'll get into that dissonance there at some point.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I don't even know where to start except for your beginning stages. I think it's the best place to start, because if we talk about the Air Force, if we talk about all of the countless degrees that you've got, and you'll probably get obtain some more in your lifetime, I'm sure. What a unique story. Just so glad to cover it. Let's just start with your beginning stages and how you got into this. If there was a pull for spirituality, I know your parents have a background in divinity and the Lutheran Church. So
Yep.
I'll let you do more of the explaining. I have read about it, but
sure,
we'll hear from the source.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, my dad was a pastor and my mom raised us 6 kids. One of my brothers was a girl, but she was basically a guy by her own reckoning. So that's why I say, just for clarity, I have 5 older brothers. But grew up in the church and loved it, quite frankly. And that was our social hub and so on and so forth. But more than that, I grew up with a father who was just a very good, decent man. And I always grew up wanting a great man for a father.
Yeah.
And there was that disappointment, but I loved my dad. I was hugged every day of my life, given a kiss by my dad, told I was loved. But my mom was perhaps in some ways my greatest influence. And she was a deep thinker. And she and I bonded over deep questions from a very young age. And she was very spiritual, even though they were both religious. But I remember coming home from Sunday school one Sunday, and mom's in the kitchen prepping the big noon Sunday meal. And we're talking. And I tell her something I had learned in Sunday school that day. And she says to me, yeah, well, Sven, don't believe everything you hear in church. This is a fucking pastor's way of saying this. And so there was already the seeds of, that sort of cracking open, that you can have spirituality without religion, but also just thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
And so I very much grew up in that and loved my parents, but I also loved religion and went to the Air Force Academy and so forth. And then I was about halfway through there and I realized, I love this and I love the military, but I don't want to be a fighter pilot. Immense respect for the classmates of mine who did, and many of them are generals now, admirals, shit like that. And but for me, it's like the calling was something different. And what it was really about was when I was 19 is when my deliberate spiritual journey began, where I began to ask the questions of myself. Who the fuck am I really? Do I have the courage to be who the fuck I really am? What do I feel called to do with my life? What, and not just, the answers of the universe sort of thing, but the answers of who am I?
Yeah.
And to go into that, and that requires both simultaneously stepping up to the buffet of life and tasting and sampling all the different experiences, but simultaneously having the courage to quit. To be able to say, and as a guy who grew up as an athlete, I was a Division I athlete, right? Competitive powerlifter, all this shit, having the courage to say, no, I don't want that. To go one step into something and say, no, I don't want it. I didn't have parents who said, well, if you start something, you better finish it. They just, they had already had 5 kids. By the time I came around, they're like, hey, I don't give a shit. They didn't come to all my practices. They didn't come to all my games. It was in the first 10 years of my playing sports, till I got to high school, I can count on half of one hand the number of sporting events my parents went to. So it wasn't that. They always went when I was in theater and when I was at an orchestra concert and stuff. But so you're really on your own to find it for yourself. And there was the freedom to quit. Don't quit. We don't give a shit. We love you. Do what you want.
Right.
But there's so much pressure to not quit, which means the kid, the young person, or the adult in midlife or whatever, doesn't have the freedom to step up to the buffet and just see what tastes good. And without the freedom to say no to that which is not you, it becomes very difficult to find, to have the liberty to find that which is me. And so I always had that. And so there was always this communion from 19 years old, communion with my own spirit, beginning to talk and find the things that were obstructing it. And it was just, the rest of my life was just me following whatever my sort of soul was calling me to do next, and me having the courage to walk away from things. And I lost a couple of marriages. And in the long run, it ends up being a blessing. How was that sent to grow me? And different career paths. I thought all I ever wanted in life was to speak, write, and counsel. I didn't know what the career was. I just knew the 3 things I loved to do the most. And I thought, well, I can do those in ministry. So I became a Lutheran pastor. But I was always a square peg in a round hole, in large part because of my fucking mouth. But I was also writing these books that were very controversial. And I was taking socio-political stands back in the 90s, standing up for gay rights as a straight guy back in the 90s. It's a different world from what it is now.
Yeah.
So just all of these things, plus my generally annoying personality, I didn't fit. And it was hard as hell for me to let go of what I thought my path was. But I was following my own inner spirit and so on and so forth. So it was always about, who am I? Again, who am I? And do I have the courage to say no to that which is not me, and to go for as long as it lasts in the direction of that which is me? You have to understand, any success I have now on TikTok, 1.5 million followers and 11 million likes, and as well as Instagram and YouTube and all that shit, is that any success I have now could not have been foreseen. TikTok didn't exist 5 years ago. Yeah. Social media didn't exist 12, 15 years ago. Yeah. Personal computing didn't fucking exist back in the 90s when I was writing my first book. So it's just like, well, I mean, it did, but most people didn't have it, whatever. The internet barely exists. So it's just like the notion that you can see at 22 or even 28 or whatever, how you're going to unfold, what type of oak that acorn is going to grow into is ludicrous, but it requires the courage to become and to sever limbs when they no longer serve you, so to speak. So it started from that, the trust, my mom, and the deep questions, and the deep questions of oneself, and having the courage and the room to say yes to that which breathes life into you, and no to that which does not. Does that make any sense?
Oh, it's great. And I read somewhere, and I'll have you clarify, your parents and you spent a lot of time at home in high school, eating dinner table talks.
Correct.
And was curious to kind of dive into some of those conversations, because it sounds like you guys got into some deep waters. You know, a lot of the siblings were out of the house at that point. Are you the
Yes.
youngest then? So you are
Yes.
the
Yes.
youngest. Okay.
Yes. So by the time I get to junior high, there's only one brother left at home, John, and John was extremely good looking and charming, and the ladies loved him. Plus, he was involved in the theater in high school and ran the sound and light booth. And so John was gone most of the time. So it was basically mom, dad, and me, where it used to be 8 people around the table. It's now 3. And mom had gone back into the workforce, and she was a professional educator, but also a crisis counselor, a trauma counselor. And so she had raised me, forgive me, but in the era, this is what we would call it back then. She raised me as a girl. I can run a sewing machine. I would iron all my dad's hankies. I would do all my own laundry. My old sports pants, like my football pants, they'd have blood stains and grass stains. And she's like, so by now, by the time I'm in 13, 14, my mom's 53. She's got arthritis. And she's like, basically under her breath, she's probably thinking, I'm not scrubbing those fucking things. So she took me down and taught me how to soak my own pants. We had an old scrub board. I had to scrub. I was raised largely as a girl. Well, we get to 13 then, and older siblings are gone. And it's around the dinner table, and mom had taught me everything else in life. So now she starts teaching me, I have no idea why, counseling. And so she was teaching me the rudimentary stuff, active listening, passive listening, summation, finding the deeper point. So she'd say, okay, Sven, based on what your father just said, what was his overarching theme? Okay, that's good. What was he saying without actually saying it? In other words, what was the message underneath the message or behind the message? Okay, what would be an active listening technique? What would be a passive listening? And it's just like, okay, and it was fun. And they were challenging me and mom. And so for me, this is why to this day, you know, my girlfriend, she's really active and she likes to do these sorts of things and those sorts of things. And I'm the most sedentary motherfucker there is. It's just like, I just want to sit and have deep conversation. That's all I want to do ever. That's like my favorite fucking thing because I grew up on that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was. And we talked about everything. And at the time, mom was running a suicide prevention hotline, suicide crisis hotline. And so we'd be talking about this. And of course, she'd leave names out. Not that anybody ever gives names on crisis hotlines,
sure.
but she'd leave names out and we'd go into that stuff. Okay, so Sven, I ran into this situation. What would be the question you would ask? If you got presented with this opening paragraph, somebody's 16-year-old is in trouble, blah, 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 what would be the first question you would ask? And what's this person really saying? And what's missing? And so on and so forth. So she's teaching me all this. It's like growing up being the fucking daughter of Bill Gates. It's just like, you think you might know a little something about computers, you know, and
right.
You become saturated. But the cool thing about my parents, I never felt like anything ever was rammed down my throat. Not their religion, not the shit mom was teaching me. It was just play. It was just fun. It was, you know, and it was our conversations. And so, yeah, that's what happened back then.
That is so cool. And just to have the serendipitous nature of that, right? It was almost like a precursor. I'm sure, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think you'd be where you were today if it wasn't for some of those conversations.
Indisputable. Yeah. And I like your word choice, serendipitous, and that there was, with my parents, so much of parenting nowadays, and there was some of this present even in my parenting of my own children, but so much of parenting is, well, I got to teach my kid this and I got to teach my kid that, or I need to guide them or whatever. Yes, my mom taught me that shit, but it was just because that was dinner conversation. But there was, and she taught me those things, such as even the basic stuff of sewing and doing your own laundry and separating whites from colors and so forth. She did that not because she was trying to teach me something per se, but because she needed help. She was running a home of 8 kids. We all had to darn our own socks. We didn't have money to throw away socks. So we had to learn how to darn our own socks, and everybody had chores and so forth. So there was never this sense of, there was never a sense of control. And here I'm going to, you need to learn, or if I'm working outside with dad, come on, I need help transplanting this tree. All right, you do the digging. I'm going to come back because I got a load of dirt over here, blah, blah, blah. It was never, I believe, by the time I got around, they had been teaching perhaps the older siblings, but with the time I got around, it's just like, there's work to do. We've got this land, we've got the house, we got everything. There's just work to do, and it's just putting you to work. And those conversations, it was, to your word, serendipitous. It was never, gee, we need to teach our kid this. And for them, and that was rooted in their faith. Okay, so their pastor and my mom's faith as well. And it was very much, that the Lord provides, that God provides. Now, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, the fundamental basic is that you can trust in the universe, and that allowing room for, to your word, serendipity, and just letting it sort of go where it goes, the organic nature of becoming.
And to also tap into what you had a really interesting quote, or it was somewhere in your bio. No, I think it was in a video. Encourage kids to do what they love, not what they're good at. And I just think it has to do with trust. It has to, and I've, as a young man, getting into later 20s now, I'm feeling a lot of that deterioration within myself of, why am I doing this? Is this for an ego reason? Is this for whose voice is driving the engine and kicking the throttle in here? Is it from bullying in the past? Is it from family members? Is it from myself 10 years ago? So I think that's just fantastic that they instilled that in you.
And so let me ask you, Jason, so let's just do mini case study right here. Let me ask you, as you're doing that questioning of what's really driving the equation of my life in these micro things, in the medium things, and in the macro things of your life, what percentage, if you're to just spitball it, knowing you could change your mind tomorrow, what percentage of the stuff, of the factors that are driving the equations of your life, what percentage is from an external power source that got put into you at some point, and what percentage of it is something that you have chosen or do choose for your life, that it comes from you rather than from an external power source? In other words, what percentage of your life is driven by external power sources?
That's a great question. And it's the first thing that comes to mind is maybe I'm in a season of paradoxically dissecting, because it's funny. You'll go down paths to gain knowledge because people will say to gain knowledge, and then you'll get those internal influences or those external influences coming in, and then intrinsically you're able to siphon through, filter through, and take what you want. But then at the same time, those moments of inspiration on a macro scale, the Vision Quest standpoint, that's always been there from the beginning. That call towards, I've always had an inclination to the supernatural. I came out of the womb musically inclined, dramatically, the drama, the arts, all of that. So there's a lot of things. And then, so it's kind of hard to answer that question specifically, because I might be in a season right now of really tuning into and figuring out the difference. Is that
absolutely
no answer?
No, that's a great answer. And that actually leads to one of the things, and I'll just be very brief here because I know you have other questions, but one of the things I recommend to people is that they go through and they just create a piece of paper and write down a line down the center, and at the top put mom and dad, and at the top of the other side put self. And just list here every single value that got conveyed either explicitly or implicitly by mom and dad. And it can be something as simple as, well, always save money for a rainy day. Or it can be something as be nice to old people, or something as big as never live in Minnesota because the people are dumb. I'm from Minnesota. And so whatever it might be, but then you come over here and you look at that value from mom and dad and you say, well, two questions. One, do I subscribe to that value? That's the first question, yes or no. And then the second question, and this is the more important part, what percentage? So it might be always save for a rainy day, and that may have been hammered into me, but my response might be, yeah, okay, that's good, but I really only subscribe to that 30%. 70%, I believe in living life right now because, gee, I had an uncle and a girlfriend who both died or whatever, and they had money in the bank, or they whatever, and I realized, shit, they never really lived because they were always saving for a rainy day. Whatever your thinking might be, but it's breaking down, it's taking what you were given from the external power sources and then reflecting on it for myself, but then assessing the percentage. And the real gold, like I said, is in the percentage, because then it's not just binary either or, but it's, well, okay, there is something there, or no, I don't subscribe to it at all. But that's forcing me to define who I am based on the external power sources as a starting point. And there may be pieces that I never got information or wisdom on, like I was never taught, owning a home versus owning a home and renting it out, but living in a different place or whatever. I was never taught anything. So I've got to break that down for myself. But a great starting point, and where the real differentiation happens between who I am and what was pressed into the wet cement of my soul to be as a child. We're all wet cement. And whatever gets pressed in there hardens, it calcifies, it becomes the virus infecting the operating system of who you are. And what you fundamentally have to do is take out those messages, look at them, and decide, is that me, or is that simply what I was given? So
that's fantastic. So fantastic. Were there any influences specifically for you besides your parents and immediate family that really threw gasoline on the fire for you? Athletes, artists back in the day?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. My high school wrestling coach was, to this day, one of the single wisest men I've ever known. And he really took the idea of, he taught us focus and the power of focus. And when I was an NCAA strength coach, I used to teach my athletes, there's no success in any venture in life without the capacity to focus their mind. I've lived in San Francisco and DC and LA, and I had a lot of friends in LA who were actors, directors, producers, and so forth. And because I was working 3 jobs while writing one of my books, one of my jobs a long time ago was working at Starbucks, and I was right in Studio City. So a lot of my actors, and I had the morning shift, so a lot of my people were people going to set because, for instance, West Wing, I had several members of West Wing who came into my fucking thing, and I give them shit. I grew up with brothers, so I'm giving them shit. We'd talk and whatever. Plus, I'm asking them questions because I ask questions and shit like that. Yeah. And for all the friends I had who were in the industry, I had friends who were on big time shows or producers or directors or whatever. And one of the things I discovered is if you lack the ability to focus, you ain't ever going to be a fucking actor, especially on a talk heavy show like a soap opera where so many people get their in. You're not going to do fucking theater if you can't fucking focus.
Right.
So this notion of focus. So my high school wrestling coach really, you can't even fucking wait tables. And I waited tables through college and graduate school. I waited tables off and on for like 12 fucking years, and I loved it. You can't wait tables. If you got 5 tables working, you know that guy over there has a well-done steak, and this one over here on the same table just has a salad. You got to time those right. While over there, you realize you still got to get a fork down because, this woman's dessert is coming, blah, blah, blah. You want to make fucking money in life, you got to be able to fucking focus. All right. Yeah. So my high school wrestling coach really taught us mental toughness and focus. But there was a guy, I was in my first year of seminary, and he was a pastor at a local church. And big guy, straight out of fucking ZZ Top. I mean, you would think that's the mental image. But the most physically powerful guy, big stomach, but hands like tree trunks. He'd crush your fucking hand. The only other more powerful grip I've encountered in my life was my father, who grew up on a farm. But anyway, what he taught me, not deliberately, but because of who he was. I mean, after Christmas Eve service, we go back to his house, the parsonage, and I'm just the intern. And we go to the parsonage where the pastor lives, and he and his wife pour up shots, and we're doing fucking shots, having just walked across the yard there in the Bay Area of San Francisco. But what I learned with him, and this really changed everything. I had grown up with World War II generation parents, and they were just good people. And there wasn't booze in the home, or there wasn't swearing, or there wasn't loudness. We were Swedes, right? Quiet people. But this guy taught me the gelling, the merging of the sacred and the profane, the merging of the most basic human elements, and while simultaneously the spiritual, the supernatural, and so forth. And it was just, and people loved him. And the guy just had love, but he'd swear up a storm. And every time he went up into Napa, he and his wife, any winery that they went to, they always bought 1 bottle to drink and 1 bottle to save. And they probably smoked weed. I don't fucking know. But the bottom line is that it really broke open this notion that it's possible to serve humanity, be an instrument of God or love in the world or whatever, while simultaneously just being a real fucking human being, which is precisely what my work right now as a therapist, sure, and writing books, but especially on TikTok. It's that fusion, and people I get people fucking banging my fucking head with a bat every time saying, do you really need to swear so much? Holy Christ, you said 5 fucks in 1 sentence. Is that really necessary? And all this shit. And then you get people who are like jumping on. It's like, hey, Sven's the first motherfucker who actually talks straight, who actually makes therapy or spirituality or dating fucking in normal people's languages. And it started back there. That fucker gave me permission. And so, yeah, there were some really extraordinarily influential non-parental people in my life.
That was Reverend Roger Bauer.
Oh yeah, shit! You pulled that one. You've done your research,
yeah. No,
Daddy-o.
I've got it right in front of me. German.
Yeah. He had been a Division I football player at Purdue and so forth. Yeah, Roger was badass.
Yeah, he sounds like it, and that's so amazing that he gave you permission to, because that's always been. I'll just be transparent with you. I mean, I've grown up in the church. I'm all into the supernatural.
Okay.
Big facet of my life. Huge all of it.
Yeah.
And that's been one thing that's weighed on my soul a lot growing up is, coming from that background, especially in the South.
Yeah, for sure.
And the things that I've dealt with, I mean, just and it's the energy. It's the energy that'll build up in a room when people, this is, Jason Damico, yeah, he's an actor and he plays bars with his band and da-da-da. And it's like, I'd always run into situations where I'd want to play on the worship team and they think I was stuck up, or they think I'd have, and then it became one of those what's wrong with me situations. And it's turned into, over the years, I've had to, do the work, shed it off and go, you know what? That ain't God. That's, I don't need to worry about that. So I love that because I love asking questions like that to see who really instilled values in people 20 years, 30 years prior.
Yes.
Because again, without him, we may not have you, so it's such a, for sure. What a great story. What a great story.
Yeah.
So with seminary and getting into that, how did that click for you? When did it finally click? Like, okay, you know what? I'm bombastic. I've got this personality. I'm going to jump into this. I feel a welling in my soul that I need to go after this. How did that come about?
To be a pastor, you mean?
Yeah, to take that plunge, because it really, it feels like it's something out of left field in a way, but at the same time, you grew up in it.
Right. No. And none of my siblings did. And the fact that we all had mixed feelings about the church ended up becoming my first book, Spiritual But Not Religious, in the 90s, that we loved it and we hated it. And I'm like, this is an indicator of something. This is a canary in the coal mine. But back to your question of when did it hit me? When I left the Air Force Academy at 19 years old, and I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't that. And I love the military, mad respect. I have old friends who have died in war and so on and so forth. So it wasn't about military or even the Air Force or even being a pilot. I respect all of those things immensely, but it just wasn't for me. That's all. I mean, it's like when you meet a wonderful woman, it's like, oh my God, she's beautiful and she's smart and she's this and that, but I don't feel the click.
Yeah.
And she can still be great. I just don't feel the click. That's all. Nothing against her. Just don't feel it. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that was 19 and I began my spiritual journey. And then it was when I was 22 and I had been kicking around all sorts of different things. And I met a woman. I met Julie. She had become my first wife. And it was in a conversation with her. And we realized that we really shared a love for God and for people and for church. And we just loved it. And it was then that it clicked. And I knew I wanted to finish my degree, but do it in world religions instead of mathematics, which I'd been majoring in all the way along because I was good at it. And that I wanted to go to seminary. And so that sort of all just took off. I had actually already mostly gotten my degree in world religions, but I'd done both at the same time. Anyway, that was with the certainty. It's just, there was a woman and it clicked, and that became the calling of my life for the next 15, 20 years, even as it morphed into other things, including the Wall Street coach and shit like that, which just fell out of the sky. But it was in that moment at 22, it's like, okay. And this will also satisfy my wanting to speak and write and counsel.
And you got kicked out 3 times out of ordination. Yes. I'm sorry. Even I don't even know what I'm reading. Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA.
Yes.
We got to get into that real quick. A quick lowdown on that.
Bottom line is,
I love it.
Bottom line is, I graduated from seminary, and as you're going through seminary, they have an oversight committee that basically tracks your progress, and you have to interview with them. And 3 different times that oversight committee said, no, fuck you, you're out of here. And we don't like your theology, or we don't like your personality, or when my book came out, we don't like your fucking book. What cuckoo ass shit is this? And but I persisted. At times I took the blows, whatever. But then on top of that, where it's not specific in that description that I wrote or that you've read or whatever, is that I also got kicked out of 3 individual parishes. So I got kicked out by the large organization 3 different times. And I was serving a church or I was being considered for the pastor job in San Francisco for Pastoral Lutheran Church. And once they found out my position on gay rights, ironically enough, it was this uber conservative church. They said, oh, you're pro-gay. We don't want you. We really want you, but because that one thing, we're not going to do it. Then another time they brought me back again to interview for that position. And they said, we want you. And they had all but hired me. And they said, nope, no good. And then a third time I was serving a church in Ohio. And again, it came to the gay rights issue. But now we're in the late 2000s. And I was killing it. And I was running up, their fucking membership was growing and all this shit. And the senior pastor was a hardcore conservative, but he had been an athlete, so we could at least talk. We could see eye to eye, and we just didn't on that one thing. And they got people behind them. We don't like Sven's stance on gay rights, and so I got thrown out of that one too. So technically, I've been thrown out of ministry 6 different times, 3 by the overarching organization and 3 by individual fucking churches. So but it was a blessing. It was a blessing because I never could have foreseen, unless those doors had been closed, these doors I would have never gone in the direction of the doors that are happening now.
Now, I also read somewhere about youth ministry. You started as a youth pastor. Is that correct?
When I was midway through seminary, I also had my wife and I had separated at that time. I was still going to seminary, and I was serving as a youth pastor of a church in suburban Minneapolis. Yes.
That must have been some experience. I mean, to be a kid in one of your, under your leadership.
Can I tell you a little story real quick?
Please, yeah, that's why I brought it up. I was hoping
my old man, my dad, who was World War II generation. So he's a pastor of a suburban church in Minneapolis when I'm growing up. And I'm like 6, 7, 8, 10. And I remember hearing the story, and it'll get told every year, that my dad, when the confirmation class, so this is like 15-year-olds, 14, 15-year-olds, or 13, 14, would come into their first day of confirmation, and it was a big church. And so there were different classes, but the class that he taught, his group, let's say it's 30 kids, they come in, and there's pastor, first day of confirmation class. They walk in on Wednesday night, and there's pastor, and they look at him, and he's standing in front of them. He's standing on a Bible. Now, my dad's World War II generation, grew up on a farm during World War II and the Depression, teaming up horses and shit before they even had tractors. So he's hardcore old school Swede. But and the lesson was, the Bible isn't God. And until you get that through your head, he would say, until you get that through your head, you don't have faith. You have a relationship with a book that is not the same. Right. And so, I mean, that when you get that story at 6 or 8, that shapes everything.
Oh,
you've got parents who are aggressive, forward-thinking people. So my favorite thing was, we used to play this game. When I was a youth pastor, we used to play this game, the senior pastor and I, and we'd take kids on retreats and so forth. And it was this game. It was basically like fucking Jeopardy or some knowledge show or whatever. And one of my favorite questions was always along the lines of, name this Bible verse, or true or false. Is this a Bible verse or is it not? And I would say, any man who has had his testicles crushed or his penis severed from his body shall not be allowed in the gathering of the Lord. And they'd hit their buzzers and say, no way, no fucking way. And I'd say, Deuteronomy 23:1. And if you're reading a new interpretation, they're watering that shit down. Go back to fucking King James shit. You get your dick knocked off, or, your fucking whatever, your testicles crushed. You can't come around God. And they just thought that was the funniest fucking thing. And now it may seem as a totally random thing, but it humanizes the Bible. And it also forced them to begin to think and take shit with a grain of salt. And it's like, what are we supposed to do? Put at the entrance of the church door some woman who's feeling everybody's testicles and okay, you can come in. Right? It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. So it's learning to take faith seriously, but also to be able to laugh at it. Okay, this was a cultural thing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I had some fucking fun in my pastoring years and youth pastoring years.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I don't think I've laughed that hard since the beginning of the new year. That's worth its weight in gold. Not to digress from that.
Go ahead.
That's fantastic. Working in an emergency wing as I think it said chaplain or minister.
Correct.
Your mother did that, right, for a little bit, or similar.
She had done crisis counseling, but she had
Crisis
not
counseling.
been a hospital chaplain. Yeah.
Okay,
And I was an
so
emergency room chaplain for a period.
yeah, I'd love to touch on that for a couple of minutes and your
Mhm.
experiences with that. And um, obviously, you talk about patterns. I was going to bring up patterns later, but in this case, I think at this point, as we start getting closer to the badass counseling era in your life, which you are currently in,
Mhm.
patterns are being a math guy yourself. I love statistics. I went to school for business.
Oh, no shit.
I had a statistics course and fell in love with it because of the patterns and pattern
Mhm.
recognition and really, discovering
Mhm.
them within yourself, in the world, and how the numbers really just don't lie. So I'd love to see correlations perhaps with if you were around death often in those situations, or folks that were on the verge of it and came back.
Yeah.
Kind of a loaded question,
Yep.
but I'm sure there's something you can kind of pick off of
Yes.
there with the bone.
Absolutely. My very first day, it was at a level 1 trauma center. So at level 1 trauma center can take anything at any time.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
Burn victim, shootings, etc. And my very first day, the very first room I walked into was the room of someone who had had an accident on the job site where they had gotten sucked into a wood chipper.
Shit.
My very first patient, my very first day, and I'm 26 fucking years old. Also on that day, a cop was shot in that city. And so that was one of the rooms I walked into, or was on a peripheral, because the person had gotten shot and they were in no position for a chaplain, but sometimes staff and family will request a chaplain be present. And so then this set the tone for you're an emergency room chaplain. And the pattern that developed, honestly, if I'm really, the real pattern that developed in terms of my own personal work is the immense awareness of one's inadequacy. The fuck is a 26-year-old going to say to someone who just got sucked into a wood chip? What the fuck am I going to say to the family of a cop that got shot, or to the cop herself or himself? And so beginning to see that in me. And then what do you do when you feel inadequate in life?
Wow.
And remember, this is the ongoing conversation between myself and myself. And that's what all of my work is about now. It's like communicating with yourself and being honest. And we used to have to write a thing called verbatims. After that situation where I'm taking a family down to the morgue, let's say, because their loved one had just gone down there, and I'm taking them down there, and I'm holding the door, and I'm staying with them, there's a whole fucking dialogue going on inside of my head. So when we wrote these verbatims, our instructor, who was the head chaplain at the time, she wanted us to not only write down what was happening, but what's going on inside of you. And mine were like, fuck me, what am I doing here? God damn it, I feel so fucking inadequate. I don't even know what to say to these people. They're so nice and they're so hurting. I don't know what to fucking say. And I didn't know the dead person. Fuck. And that's it. My chaplain supervisor, she saved that one. She said, Sven, can I use this for future class? I'm like, why would you want to save it? It's just like one big fuck. And she's like, that is so perfect, because that's real shit.
Yeah.
And so for me, one of the patterns was the feelings of my own inadequacy and what's going on inside of me, and tuning into those questions. However, to your point, yes, you become aware of also the patterns in people of what's driving people's pain. And it's not, for instance, in the case of death, it's not always the death itself. It's the feelings that go along with it when they're, hey, chaplain, can I talk to you for a minute? And it's the son of the dad. And it's not that he's sad about dad's death per se, or not only that. What he's sad about is that my dad never fucking made me feel adequate. My mom, she never accepted me as her daughter, and now she's passing away. And I'm realizing that I never got my needs met, and I've spent my whole fucking life contorting, becoming a gymnast, so to speak, contorting and bending, doing anything to try to get her approval. And now she's passing away, and I never got that approval. And I realize I just wasted 40 years of my fucking life trying to win the approval of a dying woman. Who am I now? What do I do now? Who am I if I'm not trying to win her approval? And I'm like, fuck me. These are the questions of life. And then that, plus my work in the parish and in ministry, plus my just thinking about religion in general, which was sort of when my first book came out, all of these things began to realize. And mom had been asking these questions to me, these deep questions my whole life. But when you live it, knowing it and living it are two different things. And when you're living it, when you're living it, then you begin to feel it, and then you dig deeper. What's really driving people? What's really driving people? What's really driving people? And so I think, and I could be overwriting the scene here, but I think what people sort of connect with in my videos or in my counseling or in my books is that it's digging down to that deeper shit. One of the great psychologists, and I know nothing about psychology, but one of the great American, perhaps the great American psychologist, taught at Harvard back in the 20s and 30s, a man by the name of William James. And he had many great quotes. And one of them I use as an epigraph in one of my earlier books. And he simply says this, and I want you to think about this in terms of your career professions, because it applies. And he simply says, that which is most personal is most universal. So think about that in terms of standing in front of a great painting. Think about that in terms of the pathos of a great play where someone is speaking about their own anguish or their own loss of a child. It's so personal, yet it resonates like a string inside a fucking piano, because it's like, Jesus, I've experienced that. You're speaking to the very questions that I wrestle with. Finally, someone is giving words with. Do you know how many clients I have say to me, Sven, oh, listening to Metallica got me through, or Tool got me through the hardest parts of my life, or Eminem or 50 Cent or whatever got me through those hardest times because it gave words to my experience. That which is most personal is most universal. So the greatest artists are the ones that are tapping in from their deepest source. And by going to that which is most personal, they speak to the universality of human experience in all of us. And I think that's sort of what I've been challenged in my own life to find. And what is it that's really fucking going on here? So I don't know if that helps.
Oh, so eloquently put. And I think it's a great segue to get into your authorship and your writing. And I'd love to, it's kind of a twofold question. What is your writing process? And then I'll kind of give for those who don't know your story already, you chose to be homeless for a few years as you were writing, so that could be part of your process. But I'll let you speak for yourself on that.
No, sure. That was my second to last book. That was the book I Steal Wives. I was living on the streets of Oakland and Berkeley, California, and working among the homeless and literally living among them. I had given up all of my life possessions and sleeping on concrete every night for 2.5 years, while simultaneously going to Starbucks, going to the library, whatever, and writing every single day and so forth. But the actual writing process, which I think, I'm a nonfiction writer. I don't know if I'd call it art, but what you do is art. And acting and music and so forth, which to me is the highest form of art, the capacity to create music and convey music compellingly, for me personally, because I can't do it. My process ultimately was accidental, but it's always been, and now it especially is, I don't start writing a book unless I know it will fully grab my attention and hold my attention for a long time, and it's where I can't get it out of me. I only write because I have something I need to say. And that's what sustained me. When I wrote Spiritual But Not Religious, even though it was a seminal work at least 10 years ahead of its time, I wrote it too soon and all that. But when I wrote that, I wrote it because I had something to say, and nobody fucking read it, or very few people, and very few people read my next 2, 3, 4, or 5. Even when my very last book came out in 2018, there were people reading it, but it wasn't a lot. And by that time, I had already gotten representation. I'm represented by top literary agency in the country, Trident Media Group in New York City. Yeah. But even then, they couldn't sell I Steal Wives to publishers. They didn't want to touch it. Hot potato. It's writing on
too controversial. Yeah.
Infidelity, and specifically female infidelity, because I had experiences with that. And long story. Anyway, the point is, my process is, I just write when I need to speak. Well, if no one's reading your books, why the fuck are you writing? Why fucking write? I mean, sure, I dreamed, I want to be a New York Times bestselling author, or blah, blah, blah. But if no one's reading it, most people, or even me at times, I gave up. But it's just like, then I had something more I wanted to say. Then I had something more I wanted to say, even though no one was reading my fucking books. I even, well, that's a whole separate story. But the bottom line is, I did it because it felt right to me.
Right.
And then what happens? A year ago, my girlfriend said, and I had already put out videos on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook in the past. They'd never really gone anywhere, but I did them because it was fun. It's fun to create, and it's my shit, which is why I never got into acting. I don't want to say somebody else's words. I prefer to create my own words and deliver my own way. Okay. Anyway, a year ago, my girlfriend says, "Hey, dumbass, you need to get on this TikTok thing." I'm like, "I don't dance. I'm not getting on TikTok." I had no idea what TikTok was. She says, "Hey, pull your head out of your ass and just shave it down to a minute. You can do 15. I've seen you do 5. Seen you do 30-minute. Just do it in 1 minute." I said, "So just so I've got this straight, you want me to say something substantive on a complex topic in 59 seconds with no notes, day after day?" She says,
Yeah.
exactly. And she's like, "Don't claim to be some hotshot unless you can meet the challenge." So I tinker with it, and it basically took off instantly. And that was
incredible.
And so now, my latest book, There's a Hole in My Love Cup. It's a bestseller. It literally multiple times in the last year, it has been in of the however many 30 million, however many million books Amazon sells in self-help. It's been inside the top 30.
Wow.
In overall books, it's been inside the top 400. So that's Stephen King, that's John Grisham, shit like that. But here's the point, Jason. 25, almost 30 years ago, when I first started spiritual but not religious, and when it didn't sell, and then I start writing Rescuing God from Christianity, and then I write, no one's reading my books. So why keep writing? And the point is, because I was communicating with my own soul, and this is what I needed to do next, never knowing that eventually it all just weaves together.
Man.
And you can't know. And that's why when parents say, "Well, that's never going to make money," or "You shouldn't do that, you should do this," you're short-circuiting that child's communication with their own soul. And that is directing the path of his life. For those who believe in God, God speaks from in here, not from out here. God ultimately, even if you get a message from out here, it's mediated through.
It's got to resonate.
It's got to resonate.
If it doesn't resonate,
you're doing
nothing.
It for someone else. That's right.
The consciousness is not picking it up.
That's right. And when people say to their kids, "Well, you're going to come out of college with this much debt, and then you're not going to have a job," as if having a job and making $60,000 or $100,000 right out of college is the fucking goal of life. As if, well, once you do that, then it's like, no. Mine took until I was last year 53. I'd had success, but nowhere near this.
Wow.
I had the counseling practice in New York City, and that was great. And I made a good living. But as far as feeling like everything finally came together, I was 53. 53. And now, and you know what? It had to be 53. Because if I was saying the shit I was saying now, if I was saying that when I was 31 or 26 or even 40, it'd be like, yeah, like if I talk about parenting, people often say, "Well, yeah, but do you have kids?" And I say, "Yeah, I got a 30-year-old and I got a fucking 27-year-old. And I've failed more times than you probably ever will." So it's like some careers and if you want to try to talk about the deep shit of life to some degree, if you're talking to an adult, if I'm talking to an adult audience, they've got to know that the person carries some gravitas, or the person has gone through some of the fires of life. And so plus I had to let go. Here was the thing. Back to your notion of patterns. One of the biggest patterns of my life has been this challenge since childhood to let go of ego. And I have a big fucking ego, don't get me wrong, but it's doing it. And this is the question. Jason, this is so funny. I literally just made a TikTok video right before our session. I taped it. It's all queued up to go out on TikTok tonight at like 9:00 Eastern or whatever. And it's on. And one of the questions I ask in it is simply this. So many writers and motivational speakers say, "Well, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?" And it's a great question. It cracks open your thinking. I love that question. However, I ask a different question. The question I ask is, what would you do even if you knew there was a high likelihood you would fail? See, now you're not doing it for the success. Now you're not doing it for I'm on stage accepting the Oscar, making my speech in front of the whole world. Now you're doing it just because I love the work itself. I love the grind. And even if I never have the success, I'm building a life of happiness because I love the fucking work. Well, I think actors and singers know something about that. Okay. And so anyway, just to sort of pull it all together. And that is, I just chose that I was just going to do that which makes me happy in this lifetime. And I was going to accept the failures and the pitfalls. And what eventually happened when I wasn't having the success, even back in the early 90s and the mid 90s, when my counseling career hadn't taken off or gone anywhere. I was counseling some big name people, but nothing had ever clicked and it just took off. And I was still writing the books. I had to let go of my ego's aspirations to be famous or to have, I never really aspired to a lot of money, but I did aspire to fame, big ego. And I had to let go of that. And it got burned off. I had to let it go because it was being burned off by God or by the universe or whatever. I wasn't getting it. So then what are you going to do? What are you going to do next if you're not getting your ego needs assuaged? Well, then I work on myself to reduce my needs to have my ego stroked. And then I asked myself, well, what would feel good to do next? And I just kept following that. And now, like I said, it all just weaves together. And I've got people in Uganda asking me how they can get a copy of my book. I've got people in Japan or Bali saying, hey, dude, I watch your TikToks religiously. You changed my life. I had a guy say to me just this morning in one of the comments, I literally was on death's door, an absolute alcoholic, ready to kill myself. And your work, in addition to, one or two other things, just has brought me back from the dead, and I'm alive again, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like, okay, great. Now we're cooking with gas, So I don't know if that answers your question.
Speechless. Absolutely speechless. It's so good. So I have nothing to add to that. I'm just going to go on to the next topic. Which I have a lot of things. So I'm gonna try and be brief here and pick what's most relevant to where we are in the conversation. I'll throw this at you. I thought the John the Baptist video was really interesting. I think it was titled Badass God Shit on YouTube. Okay. And you had the wood floors getting done in your house or your apartment. And you're sitting there drinking a gin and tonic and talking about John the Baptist.
What was my point with John the Baptist? I've made hundreds of these things.
The point was essentially how, I think it was like a half-hour video talking about how he, after having the summation of Father, Son, Holy Spirit experience, baptizing Jesus, and then a month and a half later, he's bitching because he doesn't believe. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was great. So I wrote it down as a bullet point. We don't have to get into it. I had to tell you in person, I absolutely love it. I think it's great.
And that's all of us, right? We get all the evidence in the world that a girl loves us, but we're still, does she really love me? Does she really love me? Or with God, we have all these amazing things happen if you're a person who believes in God, and yet we still don't believe. The next day, we're still distrusting. It's like, and in that case, John the Baptist had literally the only time in the entire Bible where the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are all present in one scene, the only time.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, a month later, he's in prison. He's saying, he sends his followers, go ask Jesus if he is the Messiah. It's like, really, motherfucker? Really? That wasn't enough? Fuck you.
I was just reading in Exodus today, earlier, happenstance about the Exodus and the Red Sea and everything. And it's the same thing. They get to the Red Sea and it's like, there's been the 9 plagues on Egypt and whatnot. And, what are we going to do now? How are you going to do this, Moses, blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing. It's
really, that wasn't enough.
Yeah. And same thing with Peter and the 3 denials. I mean, we see this time and time again in scripture. And for whatever reason, our stupid, I'm not going to say stupid, but the way we're wired, which is brilliant, but there is this carnal stupidity in there where it's like you gotta fight the doubt.
Well, and it's doubt driven by fear, and this is why fear is referenced 365 times in the Bible. That everything, that the fundamental human drive or thing that hamstrings life is fear. It's always fear, and fear is always fear of pain. And present pain, future pain, or sometimes looking at past pain. And this is why we constantly hear, fear not, don't be afraid, all these messages that God, Jesus, any human knows that what you're ultimately always battling is fear and the insidiousness. And so one of the things I tell people is, people have dreams, aspirations for their career, for their life, for their relationships, and they know what they want. People say, I don't know what I want. Bullshit. You know what you want. But there's so much fear that we go tick, 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 and we take a watered down version in this direction. We go tick, 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 go in the opposite direction, which was the story of Jonah. He went the exact opposite direction. Okay. And so why everything boils down to a choice of fear versus trust. And the fear is that I won't be okay. The trust is that no matter what happens, I'll be okay. And most people think that there is some eventuality where if it happened, if I never got my mother's approval, it would be a fate worse than death, that I couldn't handle it from the most powerful person in my life. Or if we're stuck in the desert and there's no food, we couldn't handle it. And once you come to the realization that no matter what happens, I'll be okay. Even if I get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I'll be okay. Strange as that sounds. And when you work with people who are dying, you realize, shit, they're more okay than the living. And so this notion of, can you confront what your greatest fear is in this situation. What is the one sentence you most fear hearing? What is the one eventuality you most fear? And then can you ask the question, would I be okay? In other words, would I go to sleep, wake up the next morning, itch my ass, use the bathroom, wipe my butt, go have breakfast, get dressed? In other words, would life go on, or would I literally explode?
Right.
And so that's what keeps us from going after that which we really want. It's some fear or some person's voice we fear saying something about us, etc.
And one of the other things to tag on that is, you've talked about a lot of people get caught up in the fear of the unknown.
Yes.
But for you, it's studying the fear of the known.
Absolutely.
I have never heard that before from anybody, and I'm a studier of psychology. I don't have a psychology degree, but I had classes in high school and college with it.
Sure.
Haven't seen that anywhere, and I think it's breathtaking. I hope you write a book on that at some point. I'm just gonna. I think it's fantastic. So just wanted to kind of throw that to you as well.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, that nothing will kill a career, nothing will kill a dream and aspiration more than the fear of putting it out there, knowing exactly what your brother will say, or knowing exactly what your mother will say, or what society will say, or what your buddies will say. And it's like, that's been so painful in the past when I've been criticized. I'll just keep that inside. And I would rather not go after my dream than endure what I know. You know in advance what they're going to say. And it's so painful because you've been hurt in the past. It's like, it's not worth the risk. I would rather choose a different career, tick, 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 and go this direction.
Yeah. Anxiety and depression. I'll bring this up real quick because I've had my own experience with it for years. I think a lot of people have, and whether they want to admit it or not, because there's definitely a stigma associated with it. And I think we're losing a little bit of it, which is good. As time goes on, people are getting more comfortable talking about it, and it's becoming more of and it really should. I think it's a huge, public service announcement type situation. And your thoughts on that. I have written here, it comes down to distrusting one's own inner voice, lack of courage, fear of letting go of the thing you most want, action versus results. I think this was some video that I watched. Again,
I'm not a psychologist. I respect that field. It's not my field. I'm about the soul and how the soul creates depression and anxiety and so forth, and what it's a result of. That ultimately it's when we're not, our nature is expansion. Our nature is to fly at full wingspan. All right. And so when I'm not flying at full wingspan, when I'm turning on myself, when I'm keeping my own real voice in, because I know what they're going to say, when we're doing that, eventually what happens is I'm not living my authentic voice. For those who are believers in God, I'm not living the voice that God put inside of me. God put a computer chip inside of you, so to speak. And if you're not reading that computer chip, and I talk about my book, for instance, how to, it's very simple. But if you're not doing that, if you're not heeding God's voice, but are instead heeding the voice of people around you, then you're basically saying, fuck you to God. There's something I'm more afraid of. And nothing will turn a person in on themselves. The one definition of depression is that it's anger turned inward. And that rather than being angry at the people who are hurting me, or rather than pursuing my true self, I turn in on myself. I live in fear. I live in scare because I'm not expressing my real self. And so that depression is ultimately because there's been a fissure, a break between the communication of the soul to my real self. I'm terrified of putting my real self out there and living an integrated life where my inside is integrated with my outside, because you've got the voice of your soul, your God voice rising up inside of you, for those that believe in God, or for some it's just soul. If you're not a God person, that's fine. But then you have all those other voices that have been rammed down your throat since you were a child, of who you should be and what is expected of you, and the grading in your life, that inner turmoil, that anxiety, that depression inside of you is the grinding of those two tectonic plates below the surface. And we know from geology that when those plates grind, there's earthquakes up on the surface, right? There's anxiety, there's shit going wrong, but it's ultimately your voice in battle, trying to rise up from your soul against those voices that have been packed into you from mom, from dad, from society, your whole life. And until, as the great poet said, and I always forget his freaking name, but no man is truly free until he can live as though his father is dead.
Yeah.
father, mother, man, daughter, man, woman, until you can slay those voices, until you can extract them from you and live from your authentic source. To live your God voice, until you can do that, you're not living an authentic life. And yes, you are going to feel unrest. And yes, you are going to feel anxiety. Why? Because you're not being who you were put on this earth to be. You're not living your authentic voice. You're living what those other voices want you to be. And that is never an equation for happiness. So whenever people come to me, and it's basically all my clients, and they're depressed and they're anxious, and anxiety, just for the record, is usually someone who's running from that tidal wave of all the feelings and all the experiences of their past, all those memories that have emotional charges attached to them. They're running from them because they're convinced if I stop, they would wash over me and they would overwhelm me and they would destroy me. And so they're running from their past. And that creates anxiety. I've got to create more action. I've got to stay busy. I got to do more. I got to do more because I got to keep just one step ahead of that. And so they're forcing life. They're forcing life. They're creating shit. They're not operating from their center. They're not operating from their most authentic voice. They're just trying to create, to stay a step ahead of those feelings, but also to appease those external power sources rather than operating from that centered space inside. Does that make any sense?
Hugely. Yeah. And that kind of triggers a flow state conversation. I wanted to get your opinion on performance psychology in the sports world or in the performance world in general. A lot of performance in life.
Yep.
Your thoughts on that? I'd love to dive into that for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, for sure. And it really relates to precisely to your point. It relates to precisely what we're talking about. I've been an NCAA strength coach. I've coached Olympians. I've coached professional athletes. I've counseled the same. I've counseled the very top. I've been in the office of Academy Award winners and held the Oscar or the Emmy in my hand or the Grammys in my hand and snapped a little selfie in my hand and so forth. So, and top level academics and so on and so forth. And ultimately, one of the biggest issues, this isn't necessarily the biggest, but it's certainly in the top 3 or top 5, is, and it's funny because I was just about to go into this and what I said before, but I wanted to stop, give you room. And that is one of my favorite quotes, and it comes from an author by the name of Esther Hicks. And it's sort of new agey, her writings. And if you can set the new agey stuff aside and really dive into what I believe she's getting at in this quote, she says, nothing you want is upstream. Everything you want is downstream. Lift your oars. See, what we so often, this notion of flow versus forced action. I had a client, I've actually had a few in this industry, who was a professional gambler and on TV and so forth. And I remember this particular person saying to me at one point, Sven, I know when I sit down at a table, I know if I'm in flow or if I'm forcing it. Forcing it because of ego reasons, forcing it because I'm bored, forcing it for whatever reason. I know, and it never ends well. And so what it means is to, whether it's gambling or whether it's running a business or a music career or being a top level academic, it means not forcing action. And when we're forcing action, it's usually because there's a should in there somewhere. Yeah. And a should is never causa sui. It's never from the self. It's always from an external source that we're answering to some other source, which is why this soul work of going inside, when I work with clients, I'm reaching down their throat and pulling out all their fears, their pains, and the bullshit beliefs they've been taught about themselves, because those are the external voices corrupting their own communication with their own soul. And flow then is where you've pulled all that shit out, and now you're in direct communication with your own self, and you're operating from that source, and you're not forcing action. And very often, flow is when we're doing less or doing nothing. Now that's some trippy shit.
Oh yeah.
Because most people think I got to stay busy. Or entrepreneurs that I work with, or people who run companies and so forth. It's like I got to do more. I got to do more. And as we age, we realize, shit, it's when I'm doing less that more shit happens. Or in the language of faith, we have to give God room to fucking work.
Yeah.
Give him room to work. And it's very often when we let go of a process. And why is letting go such a part of the cultural mantra? And why is it part of, some of the world religions and venerated world religions? It's because we have to give God room to work, or we have to allow things to congeal and take root and so forth. So it's, if you're feverish, if you live in a state of fever, if you live in a state of constant action, you're not in flow. There are times when I'm going 100 miles an hour with my hair on fire, but very often when I'm pursuing what I love, yes, my overall life is 100 miles an hour with hair on fire, but part of that is that I'm just back into a place of looking at my own shit, meditating, taking time alone, which is big in my work. I have to do it.
Yeah.
My own exercising, where I'm not doing something directly related to the end goal, but I'm doing other things on the infrastructure, on the backside end, or I'm literally just relaxing, just resting. When I was an NCAA strength coach, my athletes, I'd have athletes all the time, whether they're pro or Olympian or whatever. When you're dealing at those levels, that the problem is never undertraining, it's always overtraining. And so I was the strength guy. I wasn't the conditioning guy. I was the strength and mental toughness head coach. And I would say, they would come to me, coach, I'm plateauing. Well, you really only need 4 things for to grow muscle. 1, the workout itself, but then you need water, protein, and rest.
Yeah.
And I guarantee they're getting enough water. I guarantee they tend to over on those, but they're not getting enough rest. They're overtraining. Well, that goes antithetical to the intense mind, or the mind that really wants something. I really want to become a stage actor on Broadway. I really want to be a professor at Yale. I really want to have a business that's pulling in $80 million a year, like my girlfriend's company did, that she started. And I really want it, so I'm going to do more and more and more and more and more. And that's not the answer. Very often it's to do less. It's to hands off. It's to let it go, trusting that things are happening, giving yourself, in the words of athletes, or in the words of when I was coaching, to give yourself rest. And it's not just sleep, it's rest. It's to disengage. It's just important, because when we overtrain, that's when injuries happen and we plateau, et cetera, et cetera. So flow is ultimately about tuning into your own voice, but it requires getting all the crud out first and then trusting. And this is really what it boils down to. Acting only when it's inspired action versus action, or forced action. Inspired action. That means trusting that when it's time to act, the inspiration will come. That's why I don't just bang out a whole bunch of books, or even my TikToks. I do them when I'm inspired to do them, when it just feels right, and then I do it. Does that help?
100%. 100%. And I'm gonna kind of take a little bit of a turn here and go to best and worst preaching experiences or counseling experiences, and you don't have to say any names if you don't want to, but just like one of each, anything just really that comes to mind and epitomizes each side.
Well, I can remember I was in a suburban parish, and I got up, and it was fun. And this is just a tiny little one where I got up and I said, to hell with you. To hell with you. I was saying it at the people, and I was like pointing to them and shit. And then I said, and those were the words of Jeremiah when he said he didn't want to da-da-da. I got to swear from the pulpit. Anytime I can swear from the pulpit, I'm a happy guy. Worst preaching experience was the first time I preached at this church in Ohio. There were 2 different services in the main sanctuary. And I was preaching. They had services in other parts for younger audiences and shit, but the senior pastor wanted me to go on display for basically the main folks and big audiences and so forth, congregations. And I took the pericopes, the readings for the day, and I don't write out my sermons ever. And so I just lay in bed and I meditate and I meditate and I meditate, and not meditate like Om, but just I'm running it all through my head and piecing it together. And what are my main points and da, 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 da. And so I get up at the first service, and I do a whole sermon on that pericope from my brain, and I'm not behind the pulpit. I'm out and among the people, and so on and so forth. Comes the second service, same choir in the choir loft, all right, and he's there, but a whole new congregation. And I do a completely different one. And that one I started with the scene from Dances with Wolves, when he first breaks through and being able to talk to Kicking Bird, and the woman is there translating and all that. And I open with that, and I do a totally different sermon, all from no notes, all out of my brain, engage with the audience and so forth. And I go over and I sit down. Senior pastor says to me, yeah, there wasn't enough sin in there, Sven. And I'm like, you fucking cocksucker. I just preached 2 motherfucking different sermons, all from scratch, to entertain your motherfucking choir or anybody else who wanted a different fucking message. And the first thing out of your fucking mouth is a criticism. Fuck you, man. And I love the guy. But it's really, that wasn't enough. Really? Okay, I should cover every single biblical point in every single fucking sermon. Fuck off. And anyway, but I loved the guy. I loved him. I love that guy. But it's just like, oh, for fuck's sake. In a counseling setting, many times, the hardest part in any counseling setting is when someone basically says, yeah, it's not resonating with me. I don't want to do it. I had one guy, we were at my home office and we were sitting out on my porch, and he had come to me a few times, very successful businessman. And he had said, about 2 or 3 sessions in, he says, listen, Sven, I got about 3 sessions in. He said, Sven, I've now counseled with you for 11 hours. Okay. Because my sessions are long. They're like first session is between 3 and 6 hours. Each follow-up session is between 2 and 4 hours. Anyway, he said, I've counseled now with you 11 hours, Sven, and you really haven't healed me. And, I love you. You're a great guy. No disrespect, but you really haven't, I don't feel like we've made any progress or like you've really healed me. And I said, that's legit. That's totally honest. I appreciate your honesty. In fairness, I will say this, we've done 11 hours together and you've never opened up. You're terrified. You're terrified of opening up about your brother dying and about your father dying. He said, what do you mean opening up? I said, allowing those real feelings come out and grieving it and talking about it. He says, Sven, come on, please. When my brother died when I was 28, I was ripped wide open that night and I cried through the night. And then when I woke up in the morning, I was ready to go. I got it out of my system. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I realized this guy had no intention of touching his shit. You don't grieve anything overnight. Even you lose your girlfriend that you've been dating 2 months, you really, like, it's going to take you more than one night. You lose your brother and you're 28 years old. That's about 4 fucking years of grieving at least. Yeah. All right. And so it's just that he didn't want to touch his pain. And instead he chose to medicate himself with booze, with food and so forth. And so for me, I got no disrespect for that guy. I mean, I got a good laugh out of it, but ultimately the real frustration for me, the disappointment is when someone doesn't want to touch their shit, because back to what I said earlier, that would be a fate worse than death. That if I allowed myself to open that vault where all my real feelings are, it would overwhelm me and I wouldn't live through it. And in his case, he used the excuse, well, I don't think it'll do any good. I don't. And so that what that really indicates is they're terrified of looking at all the shit from their past. But as my favorite author, Joseph Campbell, wrote, the cave you most fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Mm. And he was most afraid of all the pain of his life and all the messages and all the grief and so forth. But that's the very liberation, the freedom, the happiness that he's been seeking, that he keeps going in all these directions looking for a quick fix because he doesn't want to address the real shit. So and so when that happens, it makes me sad because I do this shit for love. And most people don't know that I spend more time doing free shit than my paid shit. People say, oh, your hourly rate is ridiculous. I said, well, first of all, try living in the New York City tri-state area and then tell me that. But more importantly, it's just like, you don't know how much work I do with the homeless and with veterans and just online answering people's shit. And I don't do that because I get anything out of it. All the free shit, I do it because I love doing my work. Yeah. I love doing my work, but also I think of myself more as a pastor than even though I'm not talking God, I think of myself more as a pastor in that mentality of being a servant than, gee, this is my fucking profession. And so, So anyway, I give a lot, and it breaks my heart when people don't want to do the work, because I know this shit isn't going to magically heal itself. Their pain is going to get worse, and it makes me sad for them. So
I think it's great that you have on your website which is badasscounseling.com, correct?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. A process for admission, so to speak, or a process to write an essay, answer the questionnaire, because, people need to be ready to get to work and for them to really get the value out of their investment. I think it's fantastic that you have that. I think more people should implement those types of, I hate to say safeguards, but they'll probably get prepped before the work anyway. By doing that, it's going to start bringing things up to the surface.
Right. I require every client it's actually an autobiography, and I give only the loosest of guidelines. And I used to allow however long they want it to be, but now I cap it at 10 hours a week just because I can't, 10 pages just because I can't read more than that. It gets to be too much. But I require that in part so that we can hit the ground running the second they get into my office or the second we get on the Zoom call, that I already know their whole life story. And for many of them, it's the first time they've ever told their life story from their own perspective.
Wow.
Or that they've told it at all. And it's very illuminating oftentimes, and it's scary for a lot of them to actually face their shit. And but what it does also is I spend between, depending on the length, between 2 and 4 hours reading that, and I don't charge for that. So what it is on my part is you're already getting about $1,000 worth of work out of me. And so it's a good faith show on my part that I'm not just here to fuck you. All right. I'm here because there's work to do. And for me personally, I tell all my clients, One of my goals is to get you off my tit as quickly as possible. Where you're able to stand on your own. Why? I'm not here to milk you. I'm here because you don't want results 2 years from now. You want results now. And one of the most radical phrases that I ran across, and I still don't remember who did it. I'm inclined to think it was somebody like Carl Jung, because he was also a preacher's kid, as well as one of the fathers of psychology. And again, I know nothing about psychology, but I'll steal from anywhere if I find great information. And he said, transformation can be immediate if you go deep enough. And part of the problem with so much counseling, so much therapy, is they're not going deep enough. And you can accelerate that process so that my average client lasts between 3 and 6 months. That's it. And they're at a point where they're on their feet and they finally feel emboldened. They finally feel a sense of self. They've done the deep fucking work. That's why I don't do 1 hour every week ad infinitum. And the autobiography accelerates that process, because normally you spend 6 to 8 sessions just getting to fucking know the person. They come in my office, I've already got the questions and I'm already loaded up, or I've got their autobiography and I'm already loaded up with all the questions. That becomes a jumping off point. We can move very, very quickly and go very, very deeply in doing it. So yeah, that's been, I don't even know why the hell I started doing it. I don't even remember when I started doing it. I've just always been doing it. And there are some people, because of privacy issues and because I do deal with some big name people, who choose not to do it, and that's fine. Then we just come in as a normal session, but that just takes more fucking time. But it works. It works. And I honestly, I don't know why more people don't do it either. Other than, gee, they don't want to give away, time, free time. Maybe that's it. Or hell, why not even just charge, whatever amount for it? But the bottom line is it would just accelerate the process. But I don't know. I don't care. Other people have other methods that work. This one works for me, and we can move very, very quickly and go very, very deeply. And I can get them off my tit. And for me, most people say, well, isn't that a stupid business model? For me, it's just the opposite. It's the best business model I can think of, because yes, I'm not keeping them needy of me for years and years at 1 hour a week. And 1 hour is usually 50 minutes or 45 minutes. But for me, who are they most likely to tell their friends about when their friends are going through a problem, or their brother? Holy shit, I was seeing this guy, Sven, and we solved shit right away. And he moves so fast. And yeah, he swears a lot. And yeah, he's ugly and looks like he eats small children for lunch. But if you can get past that, he actually gets fucking results, and he gets them quickly. I'll take that kind of fucking recommendation for my business. And so from a business point, it just makes sense too. So
I love it. I love it. As we kind of start to, wrap up here.
Yep.
Another really interesting point that I saw in one of your videos, which is a direct spin-off from Steve Jobs, foolishness correlated with success.
Absolutely.
I love this. I'm diving deep into it now as I've kind of looked over my life and patterns in my life and where I'm aspiring to go and to manifest and whatever. And seeing that time and time again, am I being foolish enough in this? Did I push the envelope enough? Whatever. But yeah, just opening the floor to expand on that for you on it's a fantastic subject.
Yeah, and you know what, that's so great that you brought that up. That speech by Steve Jobs at Stanford University in 2007, whatever it was, and guy who'd never gone to college and then has all that success, and he talks about it at the end, that he has a few stories, and then at the end, that story about this notion of stay foolish,
stay hungry, stay foolish.
That's it. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And it really, that for me, he was echoing really what I had been taught as a kid. And that is, I had been given liberty by my parents at a very young age. One of the messages I got at school is, Sven, you're different. Be normal. Implicit, different is bad, normal is good. From most of my teachers and administrators, that was the message I got. The message I got at home, however, was, Sven, you're different, and God bless you, run with it.
Yeah.
And implicit in that, from a pastor and a pastor's wife who ended up teaching at the graduate level at the largest seminary, Lutheran seminary in the world, and was well respected in her field by the time she's in her 60s. So very strong thinkers, but free spirits themselves. And they said, Sven, we can't tell you what God is speaking to you. How the fuck can we know what God is speaking to you? How can I tell you what your passion is? You have to become whatever God made you to be. And that's much more biblical. John the Baptist was a fucking wingnut. I mean, it's a whole amalgam of wingnuts.
Eating locusts, right? Out in the wilderness or whatever.
Yes. And that's just, and he was tame compared to others. And so this notion of, well, if we really believe that God speaks a different message to Peter than he does to Paul versus Andrew versus Stephen, I mean, it's, if you really believe that, each of us is different, then we have to allow room for that child to express his difference, and not just express his or her difference within the parameters of what's safe for me, the parent. I had a client just this morning who, growing up, he was told by his parents, listen, you have to be either in law, in medicine, or in finance, one of those three. But within those three, you can do whatever you want. And it's just like, in other words, you have to stay within parameters that I feel comfortable with, or that assuage my ego, or that make me look good and big to everyone else. And so bringing it back around, that the Steve Jobs notion of staying foolish, I was set up for it as a kid, that it's okay to be foolish, and failure was never criticized. I took a ribbing from my brothers and so on and so forth. But it was never put down. I was just this oddball. And eventually in school, they just got used to it. Sven's he's just a wingnut. And so that set me up. And in part, because I was in drama, but also in sports, but also in orchestra, and also sang in the choir and all these things. It's just like, and in my school, it wasn't just me. There were a lot of people who were just, multi-talented, or were just, had interest. And so that was set up that it's okay to be foolish. And what that does, it puts the ego aside. I mean, think about careers like acting. Think about careers like research. Do you have the courage to go after the hypotheses you really believe in? Or in music, are you singing who you really are? Or is this somehow your ego, or you're trying to be like someone? Or in business, are you really pursuing the business that you want to pursue? I mean, think about it. I'm a carnivore. Okay. My girlfriend's basically a crustitarian, basically a vegetarian, but she allows herself to eat shellfish. Okay. And 10 years ago, I even put on my dating profile, I moved across the country for her. I even put on my dating profile, I do not date vegetarian. And if you're a vegan, go away. You guys are so fucking self-righteous.
Don't message me.
Right. And then on top of it, I said, and if you're in the fashion industry, I'm so not interested. I end up getting a girlfriend who's a crustitarian with a company in New York City in the garment industry. And I love her to death. And we've been together 8 years. Right. But the point is, just 10 years ago, just 10, 12 years ago, we were still a meat eating culture, and there was a tiny fraction that ate fake meat or whatever. Now those companies are growing in leaps and bounds, because some people had the courage to say, well, I believe I don't want to hurt animals. Can we create food alternatives? Or I want to do what's best for the environment. And it wasn't popular, and they created it. So whatever your vision is, you have to have the liberty to get rid of the fears of the known, of what people will say, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that willingness to look foolish, once you can pass through that, and once you can realize that, Babe Ruth was not just a home run king, he was the strikeout king. Yeah. Willie Stargell, Reggie Jackson, yep. They were strikeout kings as much. You got to be willing to step up to the plate and strike out. And if you're not, you're never going to achieve your greatness, because you're going to be afraid to swing. You're going to be able to just do what you feel inspired to do. So I applaud you and your work, because I need the artists. I need the actors. I need the musicians. I need the people doing cutting edge shit in terms of, podcasts and putting out new messages. I need that. Why? Because their inspirations, not just their ideas, not just their music, but their courage to heed their own voice and put out there what they believe in, whether it's avant-garde or mainstream or whatever it is. People who have the courage to be inspired, inspire me. I get energy from people like you who have the courage to follow their own voice, even if they feel they're looking stupid and what are people going to say? Because the creatives inspire me. So I need people like you. And I'm a big believer in the willingness to look foolish.
Well, it's symbiotic, my friend. I really, I've just been so fucking blessed by your presence and the online presence and stumbling upon you on TikTok, and just it's symbiotic. I really appreciate it.
Very gracious of you. Thank you.
And wrapping up here. Actually, I do. Let me go back for a second. You said something that was really interesting regarding the, from the musician standpoint, the acting standpoint. One of the big things for me that I've had to really click back and dial back is, you're inspired, your influences pushing. Okay, here's the bar. Stevie Ray Vaughan plays like this. Hendrix plays like this. Incredible. Mm-hmm. And you aspire to be like them for so many years, and because that's where the bar is set. But it gets to a point where you realize, I'm never going to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. It's a scary place to be. because then at the same time, all of your influences, and people ask me in interviews, who influenced you and so on and so forth, and I'll say there's so many, I can't even name how many there are. It's got to be in the hundreds that have affected me to a certain degree, whether it's Metallica, and then you look at it from the music production standpoint, the writing, the tones, I mean, everything, the live show. Your thoughts on, I don't even know why I'm asking this question, but your thoughts on finding the difference and the split point between aspiring to be like the greats, but also listening to your voice paradoxically at the same time. Like, how?
No, that's great.
What are your thoughts?
No, I love that, because when I am writing, or even leading up to writing a book, I'm not reading anything. I'm not reading anybody else. And it's that I'm constantly weeding out any voices of, I need to sound more like, in your case, Stevie Ray Vaughan, or I need to sound more like Prince, or I need to whatever, and pulling those voices out, because again, it gets back to communication with my own soul. What is my soul saying? Well, I'm going to do a fifth to a third here versus a fifth to a first, or, whatever the hell it is. And it's the courage to do that. But it's constantly weeding out those shoulds. And so it's like, you know, that you got to practice something so long. And then you eventually throw out the rules. And yes, they're still influencing you, but really what you're doing is finding your own voice and having the courage to listen to your own inner voice. And what's driving it, if you're not doing it, is ultimately fear. Fear that if I'm not doing more of this, fear if I'm not tweaking it this way or producing it this way, it's not going to be right, versus fuck all that shit. And what it gets down to is, am I willing to fail? Because if you're not willing to fail, you're not going to listen to your own fucking voice. You're going to take whatever is safe. And so, I have regrets in some of my work. In my very first book, Spiritual But Not Religious, seminal work, I didn't touch the issue of gay rights, even though it was a hot issue for me. And I really wanted, because I'd grown up around gay people, and it was just like, they're my brothers and sisters, just like anybody else. So it was a non-thing for me. But back in the 90s, or back in the 80s, when I first started standing up about this shit, it was like, no. And my thinking at the time was, well, I don't want my work on reforming the church to get sidetracked by this. And I wish I'd put that in there as well. So there are times when I've short-circuited my own voice, and later I was like, I regret it. But in the way, I made my decision, and you live with it. But yeah, it really gets down to, you have to, and this is what we're talking about earlier. Right. You have to have the courage to tune out the other voices. You have to have the courage in the end to tune out Stevie Ray Vaughan or Neil Peart or whatever your instrument is, to tune out, or whatever your passion is, to tune out how Steve Jobs would do it if I want to start a tech company, or to tune out whatever. Yes, I've looked at it all, but in the end, and it's the same way when a kid at 20 years old or 22 years old, yes, I've listened to mom's wisdom. Yes, I've listened to dad's wisdom. Yes, I've listened to a culture saying, and I've ingested it. And then it's like, now I'm going to blurt it out, and I'm just going to be me. And it's a willingness to disappoint all of them. It's a willingness to be thought a fool. It's a willingness to endure their criticisms. And so it's less about the mechanics of hearing your own voice, because again, I don't think people don't know what they really want to do, or I think more often than not, and there may be some of that, but if you scratch the surface a bit, they know what they want. They know what their expression is, or the direction they really want to go. But what's confounding the process, making them think they want this other thing, it's not that other thing. It's just the fear that they have regarding how this will be received, what they really want to be doing. And it's that, again, it gets back to ego, fear of criticism. And it's just like, at what point, as I wrote in my book, every morning when you wake up, life is whispering two questions in your ear before you get up, or right as you're getting up, itching your butt, going in to go to the bathroom. And it's simply this: who the fuck are you really? And you have the courage to be who the fuck you really are. Because anything other than that is a watered down version of your most authentic self. Anything other than that is a fuck you to God, because God created you with that chip inside, and your job is just to read that chip. And the way you read that chip is simply by energy. And I'll tell you what I mean very briefly. In the creation story of Genesis, God forms the clay, but it doesn't have life. What gives it life? He breathes into its nostrils. He breathes the breath of God into his nostrils, and it animates him, gives him energy. What does Jesus do in the upper room after his resurrection? And he's come back, and he's talking to his disciples, and then he breathes on them. And I began to think, what is it that breathes life into me? That's the voice of God. What is it that literally gives me energy? When someone has energy, we talk about them as inspired. Latin, spirit in. We talk about them as enthusiastic. Greek, theos, and God inside. And so these things, this notion of having energy. So all you got to learn to do ultimately, whether you're a believer in God and you want to follow God's call for your life, or whether you're a non-believer and just want to be in tune to your own soul, what gives you energy? What breathes life into you? It's not what do I like, what do I want? Those are the wrong questions. Those are head questions. Those are good. They can help. But ultimately, does this path breathe life into it? Does it give me energy? Does it energize me? Or does it bleed me, bore me, numb me? Do I have to conjure up energy just to go do it? It's not you. That's somebody else's path. Your path, what you were written on your chip, what you were put on this earth to do is to read your own fucking energy and have the courage to do it, because anything else is a big fuck off to God.
Jeez. It's just so good. And it also I kept hearing lack of trust with yourself. Yes. All of that, and this is kind of work that I've been doing with myself, is you and it also not good enough. Fear of not being good enough. Your voice not measuring up to one of the greats. Or if I'm that's one thing that I've found over the years is, sure, you can be inspired for years by doing something, but then it gets to a place of, oh, I'm actually, I've had this where I'm actually afraid to solo with what I'm hearing in my head, because I'm just regurgitating what everybody else has done. Because it's worked, or because they got applause for it.
Right.
So then, and it's crazy because as I've kind of gone down this journey and I've realized that how the greats got there is they've just been listening to that inner voice. Because when they get hooting and hollering for doing this one thing in a solo, what I've realized is that when I'm on stage doing this, when I'm listening to that inner voice, there's an automatic pinging and response from the audience, where they'll just start going crazy. And I'm like, I don't even know why they're going crazy. I just played like 2 notes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's really, but
it requires it. But to that point of authenticity, one of my neighbors here, she produces Broadway shows, and they're in the process of developing a show. And it's about Sister Rosetta Tharpe. In guitar history, Elvis and all of the great men track back to her as the greatest, that she revolutionized rock and roll, and she was a preacher. She was working in the church, and that style of rock and roll guitar didn't exist. You look up Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
I will be.
And so her style didn't exist. She created it, and she became the underpinning that Lennon, McCartney, Elvis, and the great ones of that area that then became the great ones, and Jimmy Page and all those, all track back. Many of them track back to her, even before the ones we always hear about.
Robert Johnson, whoever. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. And so the point is, and it goes back to a woman, which is just the beautiful irony of rock and roll. I love that. I love that. But ultimately, it's someone having the courage to be original. And it's that willingness to fail. It's the willingness to step up to the plate and strike out. And like I said, I wrote 6 books. Nobody read my fucking books. I had to be willing to fail. And I was doing it for me. I wanted my voice to be out there. And even if it's forever forgotten, I don't care. I need to say it. That great quote, we're all fucking actors on the stage of life, and, on the stage for our little time. And are you going to play your fucking role? Because you were given a role. What is your fucking voice? Nobody cares if you sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan. What we care about is what's your voice. Give me something new. Give me your originality. Feed me, electrify me with your originality, whatever sound it might be, whatever volume it might be, whatever texture and timbre it might be. Give me what is inside of you. That's what we are all longing for in life, that sense of authenticity. I was being interviewed by CNBC. They wanted to make a show out of me, and they were, in fact, the 9th. That was the 9th. That was actually the 7th time. There have been 9 where somebody was trying to make a show out of me, and CNBC brought me in for interviews. And I was dealing with the top guy and his right-hand woman there. And one of the things they said after, they'd interviewed me and so on and so forth, one of the people in the room said, the biggest thing that we look for in building a TV show around someone is authenticity. And I don't think it can be questioned, Sven, that for all the other things that might be criticized about you, you are in fact authentic. And that's what people are looking for, that authenticity, that's what we resonate And here's the thing, I know nothing about theater, but I do know this. One of the great quotes from theater is, the mark of good theater is seeing yourself on stage.
Ooh.
Seeing something that you have been, are, or aspire to be. And remember back to that William James quote, that which is most personal is most universal. So the more I'm showing my authentic, my true originality, the more it resonates in someone else that, yeah, I feel that way, or yeah, I used to be that way too. And that pulls me into the story. But if I'm not willing to be authentic, if I'm not willing to be original, I'm not going down to that which is most personal. And therefore the audience isn't going to resonate with me. Right? It requires the courage to look foolish, to take those risks. Actors are always talking about taking risks. Well, yeah, it's you trusting your own inner voice. And musicians are always talking about, all the influence and weeding that out. I had friends who were pilots, and in war and in civilian life, they talk about checklists, pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight, pre-landing, But the great ones are doing it so long that they're always going through their checklists. But in the end, that large instrument with 4 engines and so forth is an extension of that pilot. That's why Sullenberger could land that fucking plane in the Hudson River without it sinking and getting everybody out, because it was an extension of him. He had been doing it his whole life. They don't, sure, they can teach how to do a water landing, but in the end, till you get there, you can't train for that shit. Right. But you're following your inner voice and your own instincts that you've honed over the years. So now you throw out Prince, you throw out fucking Stevie Ray Vaughan, you throw out Hendrix, you throw out Terry Kath of Chicago, whom Jimi Hendrix called the greatest guitar player in the universe. Yeah.
Terry Kath, baby. Oh, man, the fact that you brought him up. Oh, yeah.
I'm a huge, Chicago pre-Terry Kath's Russian Roulette death, pre-Terry Kath's death was the best. But anyway, I've gone on too long, but that courage to be authentic,
All right. So as I say for the third time, wrapping up, I want to be sensitive to your time. One last bullet point before we wrap it up.
Sure.
Churchianity. It's a word that's been coined. It's been thrown around in the last 10, 15 years, maybe more, maybe longer. Your thoughts coming out of the pandemic. A lot is being exposed here. A lot of the bullshit just coming out. All right. And I'm so happy about it. All the placating, all the dogma, all the ridiculousness that it's like, why are we here?
Right.
Why are people getting together for that? This is ridiculous.
Right.
So your thoughts on to where the church is going, where the body of Christ is going per se, for those that don't believe in it, you can do that spin, whatever. But just that place of people are hungry. People are hungry for truth.
Yes.
And I feel like this message has just really gone down a rabbit hole for a long time.
Yeah. And this is what I was writing about 30 years ago when I started writing spiritual but not religious, that the writing was on the wall. And we saw it in the mainline denominations first, the Episcopals, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, and then down into the Methodists. And now it's down into the Baptists, and the Catholics are all feeling it, that this mass exit out of religion because something's not working. And as I talk about in the book, which sadly has gone out of print, but as I talk about, there are many reasons for that. But ultimately, what drives people to come together nonetheless, despite all the flaws in the church and in church leadership and in the theology and so forth, is ultimately that longing for communal spirituality, that I can have spirituality in my own personal life, and I do, and you do, and so forth, and we all have that. But there's something about coming together, that notion that religion at its best is shared spirituality, shared conversation with God, or whatever it is that we worship, but it's been corrupted by so many different factors, and so hence so many people leaving. And yet the longing to share it with others, and also to be led, to have someone who maybe is, as I call it with regard to my TikToks and my books, I'm just one beggar showing another beggar where to find food. To me, that is what it means to lead when it comes to spirituality. It's like, but we corrupt it with so much else, and the growth and the money and the whatever, the self-aggrandizement and so forth. And I'm not going to lie, I have some ego myself, so they obviously. But the bottom line is that people are searching and people are hungry. And so we're seeing the rise over the last 20, 30 years of, let's say, yoga. In a way, yoga for many people is shared spirituality. We're coming together, we're releasing the pains of life, we're communing before and after, and we're having a bodily experience. For many people, it's the gym. For many people, it's anything that brings us together where we're being somewhat vulnerable, where we're opening up to others. that there's immense pleasure in that. But yes, part of where we're at in our society is there is this longing to have our spirituality spoken about, that we can begin to discuss this notion of self, and that we can be furthered along, and that we can share that path with other people. And as I've been saying for 30 years, that there are still plenty of churches out there doing good things, and God bless them, and I applaud them and so forth. But there are people who aren't sure what they believe, and who are struggling with faith, who maybe wouldn't feel comfortable in a church. And so there are so many people with so many different spiritual issues, and the longing in our culture, and perhaps globally, but I'll speak specifically to America, because this is where I live. There is a longing to have their spiritual needs met, to have something speak to the voice of their soul, to feel like they're moving, to have the epiphanies, all the shit that church is supposed to be. And now to have those experiences without some of the crap that may distance them from the church. So the human impulse to have their spiritual life spoken to and connecting with others at the spiritual level is extraordinarily important. I don't think that'll ever go away. It's part of being human. And so what we seek is people who have the courage to speak up and speak their authentic voice, and that other people can ping off of and find the food that beggar is leading them to. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I love it. The beggar leading to the beggar telling the other beggar of where the food's at. Yeah, I've never really heard of that before. Very profound, very profound. So I've got one last thing here that I do. I call it the shootout section, where I just say a word that's industry related, or not industry related, related to the guest. I'm so used to having, musicians on the show. Right. So it's like, that's related to the guest. And you just fire a word back that is, first word that comes to mind. It's just kind of a fun word game.
Fair enough.
Happiness.
Me.
Wow. That's good. Counseling.
Fun.
Life.
Deathly.
I like it.
I don't know what the hell that was.
That's the new book. Somewhere in there. God.
Fun.
Spirit.
Deep.
TikTok.
Massive.
Bible.
Deep.
Truth.
Light.
Faith.
Heavy.
Pizza.
Yummy.
Oh, it's so good. Got the rhyme in there at the end and everything.
Did I? Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, heavy, yummy.
Oh, hey.
There you go. Boom.
Who knew?
So the last question that I have that I ask everybody at the end is, if you could go back in time to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would you tell them?
Be even ballsier. And I was ballsy, but be even ballsier. And the corollary would be fuck them.
Yeah.
How about you, Jason? What would you tell your 15-year-old self?
You got to keep going. You got to keep going.
I like it. Easy to get bogged down. Easy to lose the path.
Yeah, you got to keep going. And that's even coming from a place of, I still have to keep going.
Right.
So, I'm just now getting into that place of, it's really not about the destination. It's about the journey. And I mean, people will throw that down your throat time and time again. But again, until you feel that visceral experience of, okay, this is not working.
Yep.
This is not sustainable.
Right.
The admiration, the awards, it's not.
Right.
Then what? Yeah, I'd just say, keep going.
I love it. Good answer. Love it.
So for those that are listening, driving in the gym, whatever, where can folks find you, the handles for social, and then, anything coming up soon?
Sure. Obviously, as we've already mentioned, Badass Counseling on TikTok. I'd love to have you come. Got a lot of people weighing in. I try to comment when I can, and so there's a bit of a conversation there. But Badass Counseling on TikTok, and same on Instagram and on YouTube. And Instagram, sometimes if for some reason you got something, I let people reach out to me through direct message from Instagram. I don't get to everyone. I have hundreds every single week, but if you have something that's eating at you or just want to throw a question out at me, whatever, feel free to do it through Instagram or my website, which is badasscounseling.com. Also there are my books. There's a Hole in My Love Cup, which has become an Amazon bestseller. And the rest of my books. Also, I put up all podcasts I've ever done there. And also I have do-it-yourself video courses to take you through the steps of healing and beginning to find your authentic voice, and different packages there. And I think that's everything.
Awesome. I can't thank you enough. This has been,
you were great.
So like it's all, I'm speechless still from whatever you said earlier. I have to rewatch this when I'm editing it. I appreciate it. Thank you. I really
no, thank you for
the
the opportunity, Jason. This is very gracious of you to have me on your show. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
It really was.
And deep.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you guys been watching and listening to the Jason Damico show. Check out the description box below for Sven's information and follow him there. Definitely, if you're not on TikTok, make an account just to follow this guy, because his account alone is worth making a subscription or account for. So we will see you all on the next episode, and peace.